No one who's ever spent a night in the Montana mountains forgets what a real thunderstorm feels like. It starts as a low rumble, something deep, ancient, rolling across the pines and stone like the sound of the earth itself grumbling. Then the wind picks up, sharp and cold, tearing through the forest and shaking the tents of anyone brave enough to sleep out here. On this night, the storm seemed almost angry, lashing the ridge with sheets of icy rain and bursts of white lightning that lit up the sky like a giant's camera flash. Sierra Blake had been through plenty of storms before. She was a wildlife biologist, toughened by years of camping alone, running field studies far from cell service and comfort. She sat huddled in her faded green tent, jotting field notes by headlamp while the wind rattled the fabric around her. Her breath fogged in the cold air. Somewhere in the darkness, a tree crashed down, and Sierra winced. She always felt a kind of nervous respect for nature when it was like this. Unpredictable, dangerous, alive. But tonight wasn't like every other storm. Somewhere in the roaring darkness, a sound cut through the wind that made Sierra's blood run cold. It was faint at first, barely audible over the pounding rain, a high, desperate cry, too frantic to be a bird, too raw to be a coyote. She listened, heart thumping, as it came again, closer this time, a foal, lost, crying for help. Sierra's training kicked in. She grabbed her rain jacket, shoved her bare feet into hiking boots, and snatched her flashlight. She didn't pause to second-guess herself, didn't stop to think about mountain lions or wolves, or the sheer stupidity of running out into a storm at night. She just moved, out of the tent, into the black, her flashlight beam jittering as she stumbled over slick roots and mud. The wind was so strong it nearly knocked her over. Rain stung her face, blurring her vision, but Sierra pressed forward, following the frantic cries. They were coming from the ridge above her camp, somewhere near the edge where the forest thinned and the ground dropped away. She could hear branches breaking, hooves pounding the earth, and, somewhere farther off, a low guttural growl that raised the hairs on her neck. Wolves. Sierra's mind raced through worst-case scenarios. A foal separated from its herd by the storm. Wolves driven by hunger, taking advantage of the chaos. It was a scene as old as the mountains themselves, predator and prey playing out their roles under the furious gaze of the storm. She pushed through a tangle of thorny undergrowth, the cries growing louder now, more desperate. Her flashlight beam caught a flash of movement, a small, dun-colored foal wedged between fallen branches, eyes wide with terror. The foal's sides heaved as it tried to free itself, but the thicket was too tight, and panic had set in. Just beyond the little horse, Sierra saw shifting shadows, eyes gleaming in the dark, circling, waiting for the right moment to strike. Wolves. At least 3 of them, maybe more. Their bodies were barely visible in the rain, but Sierra could sense their hunger, their intent. They moved with a kind of predatory grace, ears flattened, teeth bared, slipping between trees as silent as ghosts. Sierra's heart pounded. She fumbled for the bear spray on her belt, knowing it would do little against a whole pack if they decided she was a threat. She stayed low, ducking behind a boulder, her breath coming in sharp, shallow bursts. The foal cried again, a sound so raw it seemed to tear right through the storm. Time slowed down. Sierra's mind raced through her options. Could she scare the wolves off? Should she try to reach the foal? She knew she couldn't save it by force. The wolves were too close, and she was just one person, half-soaked, shivering in the dark. A sudden flash of lightning split the sky, illuminating the clearing for a split second. Sierra caught a glimpse of the wolves, muscles taut, eyes locked on the foal. One crouched low, ready to spring, and then, As if conjured by the storm itself, a black shape exploded out of the darkness. The ground seemed to shake beneath pounding hooves. The lead wolf snarled and spun, but it was too late. A massive black stallion crashed into the clearing, rearing up with a wild scream that cut through the rain like a blade. The stallion's coat shone wet and slick, his mane streaming, eyes blazing with fury. The wolves scattered, yelping as the stallion brought his hooves down just inches from the closest one. The foal cowered beneath him, trembling, but the black stallion planted himself between the young horse and the predators, muscles tensed and ready to fight. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The rain pounding, the thunder rolling, the wolves circling at the edge of the light. Unwilling to challenge the stallion's raw power, Sierra stayed hidden, awestruck. She'd seen wild horses before, but never like this. Never this close. Never in the thick of battle. The stallion was beautiful in a way that defied logic. Every line of his body honed for survival. Every instinct focused on protecting the vulnerable foal at his feet. The lead wolf darted in again, testing the stallion's resolve, but the horse spun and lashed out, hooves flashing dangerously close. The wolf backed off, snarling, and the rest of the pack began to lose their nerve. They circled once, twice, then melted away into the trees, vanishing into the storm. Only then did Sierra let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She watched as the black stallion lowered his head to the foal, touching noses, checking for injuries. The foal whimpered but seemed unharmed, save for a few scratches and a trembling fear that wouldn't soon fade. Sierra wiped rain from her eyes, heart still racing. She knew better than to approach. Wild horses were unpredictable, especially in moments like this. But she also knew she'd just witnessed something extraordinary, a moment of wild courage, an alliance forged in the darkest of storms. She stayed back, letting the horses calm, her mind racing with questions and awe. Above her, the storm finally began to move on, thunder rolling away into the distance, leaving the ridge soaked and battered but alive. Sierra turned off her flashlight, letting the darkness close in, and listened as the night settled around her. A fragile peace returning after chaos. The foal was safe, for now. But as Sierra watched the black stallion keep vigil over the young horse, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Out here, under the wild Montana sky, every story was written in survival, in bravery, and in the bonds that form when the world is at its harshest. Sierra felt herself become part of the story too, bound by what she'd witnessed, determined to see what would come next. Lightning flickered across the black Montana sky, illuminating the clearing in brief electric flashes. The storm still rumbled, but the worst of its fury had passed, leaving the land drenched and trembling under the echo of thunder. The air was alive with that wild metallic scent, ozone, wet earth, the tang of sap and broken branches. In that primal hush that follows a battle with nature, every sense sharpened, every sound magnified. Sierra stayed hidden behind the slick boulder, breath held, watching the black stallion, Midnight, as he stood guard over the young foal. Midnight's sides heaved, nostrils flaring, his coat glistening with rain. He was larger than life, muscles rippling, eyes burning with the wild intelligence of a creature forged by hardship. The foal shivered beneath him, still in shock, its small body pressed low to the ground, as if the darkness itself might swallow it whole. For several heartbeats, the world held its breath. Midnight turned in a slow, deliberate circle, making sure the wolves had truly retreated. His ears flicked at every small noise, the wind sighing through broken trees, the drip of water from tangled branches, the soft, unsteady breaths of the foal. When he was satisfied that no predator lurked close, Midnight lowered his head to the foal's neck and gave it a gentle nudge, encouraging it to stand. Sierra felt a surge of hope watching the pair. It was clear Midnight was no ordinary Mustang. He'd come out of nowhere, wild and unafraid, risking himself for a foal that may not even be his own. Sierra's pulse slowed, curiosity mingling with awe. There was a story behind this horse, a reason for his fearlessness, his willingness to face down a wolf pack in the worst of a mountain storm. The foal staggered to its feet, spindly legs trembling but holding. It was a pretty thing, golden dun with a black-tipped mane and large, soft eyes. Midnight stepped protectively in front, placing himself between the young horse and the darkness beyond the clearing. His tail swished, sending water flying, as if daring anything, anyone, to come closer. Sierra risked inching forward, careful not to break the fragile piece. She kept low, boots sinking into the mud, eyes fixed on the horses. She could feel her own fear receding, replaced by the quiet, scientific wonder that had first drawn her into fieldwork years ago. It was a feeling she cherished, the privilege of bearing witness, of being trusted by the wild, if only for a moment. Then, without warning, a rustle in the underbrush sent Sierra's heart racing. Midnight's ears shot forward, muscles tense. The foal froze. Sierra raised her flashlight, hand trembling, ready for anything. Out of the darkness, a shadow slunk low to the ground. A coyote, its tawny fur slicked down by rain, eyes sharp and wary. It paused at the edge of the clearing, nose twitching, head cocked as if weighing its chances. Sierra sucked in a breath. Another predator? Or just an opportunist, come to scavenge after the chaos? But something about the coyote was different. It didn't move with the aggression of a wolf or the frantic hunger of a scavenger. Instead, it circled the clearing at a respectful distance, emitting a series of sharp, warning barks. Sierra recognized the behavior. This was no threat, but a sentinel. The coyote was driving away smaller predators, keeping the area clear, almost as if it was helping. Midnight snorted, eyes never leaving the coyote, but he didn't move to attack. There was a grudging respect there, an understanding that out here, alliances could be forged in a heartbeat. The coyote, Ember Sierra would later name her, kept her distance, circling like a wraith, every sense attuned to danger. She barked again, her voice echoing through the battered forest, and the smaller, braver scavengers, foxes, raccoons, melted away. Sierra watched in amazement. It was as if the wild itself had called a temporary truce. Horses and coyote, human and night, all gathered under the same battered sky by the gravity of crisis. Sierra's own role was clear: help but never interfere, observe but never control. Her flashlight flickered. She tucked it away and let her eyes adjust to the darkness. The storm's rage faded, replaced by a heavy silence broken only by the soft sounds of life returning. Leaves dripping, horses breathing, Ember's barks fading into the distance. Sierra could see Midnight's muscles finally relax. His guard never fully down, but his aggression tempered by the quiet. The foal, encouraged by Midnight, took a shaky step toward a shallow puddle near Sierra's feet. Sierra held absolutely still, not daring to breathe as the foal stretched its neck and drank. Midnight watched, close enough to intervene if anything threatened, but he allowed the foal this small comfort, this fragile moment of safety after terror. Sierra whispered, barely louder than the wind, "You're safe now, little one." Her words carried on the breeze, unnoticed by the horses but somehow necessary, for herself, for the wild, for the thread of hope that always endured in the face of darkness. A faint glow began to edge the horizon, false dawn hours away from sunrise but promising a new day. The storm had changed the land, knocking down trees, flooding trails, and redrawing the lines of safety and danger. Sierra knew that the world these horses woke to would be different than the one they'd known. The journey back to the herd, if it was possible at all, would be fraught with new perils, but as she watched Midnight, the foal, and the sentinel coyote, she felt a quiet certainty. Together, maybe, they could survive. Thunder rolled one last time, soft and distant, as if the mountains themselves were closing a chapter. Midnight raised his head, mane gleaming wet in the dying light, and gave a low, rumbling nicker, almost a reassurance. The foal pressed close to his side. Ember disappeared into the shadows. Her watchful eyes the last thing Sierra saw before darkness closed in again. Sierra returned to her camp, heart still pounding, mind spinning with questions and gratitude. Tonight, she had witnessed the wild at its most raw and real. Danger, courage, and the fragile, unspoken bonds that could form between even the most unlikely allies. Above, the sky began to clear. For a moment, a single star pierced the cloud cover, shy, flickering, but defiant. Sierra gazed up, promising herself she would do everything she could to help, without ever taming or interfering more than the wild allowed. The night was not over. The story had only just begun. Dawn's earliest blush painted the clouds in streaks of pale lavender and pink. But the forest floor was still shrouded in the deep gray shadows of night. The storm's fury had retreated to a distant memory, leaving behind a land both battered and hushed. The broken branches, muddy gullies, and uprooted saplings told the story of chaos, nature's wild reset. Yet within that aftermath, a fragile peace hovered, as if the mountain itself was catching its breath. Sierra Blake, her boots caked with mud and her rain-soaked jacket clinging to her skin, crouched at the edge of her camp, unwilling to disturb the delicate balance she now witnessed. She'd barely slept, her mind replaying the events of the night. The wolves' predatory gleam, the black stallion's courage, the foal's desperate struggle for life, and the mysterious coyote that circled with purpose rather than hunger. In the ghostly light, Midnight stood tall, the embodiment of the wild, a living legend, dark as the night itself, steam rising from his flanks. He had not left the foal's side for a moment. Every muscle seemed tense, every movement deliberate. He nosed the foal gently, checking for wounds and offering a comfort no human could give. The foal, still trembling but now able to stand, leaned into him with the kind of trust reserved for family. The small herd that once protected this young horse was nowhere to be seen, scattered by the storm, their fates unknown. Suddenly, a flash of russet darted between the blackened tree trunks. Ember, the coyote, was back, moving with a restless energy, tail low, hackles half raised. Sierra's heart beat faster as she watched Ember weave her way around the clearing, pausing to sniff at wolf tracks, then letting out a series of yips and barks that echoed through the trees. It was a warning, sharp and clear. "I am here. This is my territory. Stay back." The horses tensed but did not panic. There was an uneasy truce, a recognition, perhaps, that the rules of survival had shifted after the storm. Ember, wild and wily, was no threat in this moment. Her presence, in fact, seemed to deter smaller scavengers. Sierra spotted the gleam of eyes at the edge of the shadows. Foxes, a raccoon, a curious pine marten, all waiting for the chance to scavenge, all wary of the coyote's dominance. Sierra stayed very still, barely breathing as she observed this uneasy alliance. Every instinct from her years in the field told her to keep her distance. Wild creatures, especially in moments of crisis, had little patience for human interference. She could offer help in subtle ways, maintaining her campfire to keep larger predators at bay, moving slowly so as not to startle the foal, and speaking only in the softest of whispers. In her notebook, she scribbled observations. Coyote presence keeps smaller predators at distance. Unusual, almost collaborative behavior. Storm trauma forging new alliances. Midnight eyed Sierra from across the clearing, the whites of his eyes showing. For a moment, he stamped a hoof, tail lashing with warning. Sierra raised her hands, palms open, a gesture of peace. She understood what was being communicated. Help, but on our terms. Respect the boundaries. She nodded, whispering, "You're the boss out here, friend. I'm just the witness." A few yards away, the foal let out a soft nicker, a trembling sound that seemed to ask, "Where is everyone? What comes next?" The foal's sides were scratched and caked with mud, but as Sierra watched, she saw it take a shaky step toward a patch of grass and begin to nibble. Survival, even after trauma, was a stubborn thing. The morning progressed slowly. The sky lightened to a watery blue, streaked with the last remnants of cloud. Ember finished her patrol and settled on a rock at the edge of the clearing, her golden eyes half closed, but her ears rotating to catch every sound. She was an outsider here, never truly part of any herd, always skirting the edge of belonging. Yet the horses allowed her presence, a silent agreement born from the previous night's chaos. As the sun inched higher, a faint warmth seeped into the clearing, steam rising from the wet earth. Sierra used the opportunity to quietly tend her camp. She gathered damp firewood and coaxed a flame to life, the crackling logs throwing a circle of safety around her gear. The small column of smoke drifted upward, a signal to anyone, human or animal, that she remained present, watchful but not a threat. From her vantage point, Sierra watched as midnight began to graze, never straying far from the foal. Occasionally he would snort or toss his head, clearly uneasy but determined to maintain control. The foal stayed close, occasionally venturing a few hesitant steps away before returning to the stallion's shadow. When the wind shifted, carrying Sierra's scent, Midnight would raise his head and meet her gaze, measuring her intent, testing the fragile trust. The balance of the clearing was constantly shifting. Once a red-tailed hawk swooped low, sending the foal scurrying under Midnight's belly, but the stallion stood firm. Ember, with a disdainful yawn, rose and trotted a wide circle, barking once more into the trees, her call a warning and a challenge. Sierra realized that the coyote was guarding the perimeter not for the horse's sake alone, but to protect her own chance at survival. Any large predator driven off by her presence was one less competitor for food, one less threat in the hungry dawn. Around mid-morning, Sierra noticed a subtle change. The usual silence of the forest gave way to the soft chatter of birds, and a squirrel crept down a tree, emboldened by the return of daylight. The world, battered but unbroken, was starting to move forward. Even the foal, shaking off the worst of its fear, began to explore, following Midnight a little farther each time. Sierra made more notes, marveling at the resilience before her. The storm had forged a coalition, horses and coyote, human on the fringes, all holding space for one another in this battered patch of wild. She felt a sense of kinship, not just with the animals, but with the wild itself, a place where nothing was guaranteed, where survival depended not just on strength, but on adaptability and the unspoken agreements of necessity. As the day warmed and the shadows shortened, Sierra looked toward the broken trails leading deeper into the mountains. The herd, she knew, would not return for the foal. The storm had scattered them too far, perhaps forced them to seek safety in lower valleys. If the foal was to survive, it would need to journey back toward the open range, guided by Midnight's leadership, and perhaps watched over by the coyote's wary eyes. She felt a heavy responsibility settle on her shoulders. She couldn't force nature's hand, but she could help clear the way. With a deep breath, Sierra shouldered her pack and began to quietly scout the trail ahead, marking fallen logs, searching for the safest path back to the grasslands. She knew Midnight would follow if the way seemed safe. She trusted, too, that Ember would keep warning away threats from the shadows. As the sun reached its zenith, Sierra glanced back at the clearing. Midnight and the foal stood silhouetted against the light. Ember a shadow at the edge, all three unlikely allies bound together by fate and necessity. Sierra felt hope bloom, fragile, yes, but real. In the wild, survival was never a solo act. It was earned in moments of risk, in temporary truces, in the silent, shifting alliances of dawn. And so the day began, full of promise and peril, with every step forward a testament to the resilience and mystery of the wild. The journey, dangerous, uncertain, and beautiful, had only just begun. As the weak sunlight struggled through the battered pine boughs, Sierra Blake finally allowed herself to believe that morning had truly arrived. The chaos of the storm seemed distant, though reminders lay everywhere. Ragged strips of bark torn from trees, muddy pools reflecting the pale sky, a lingering tension in the air as if the land itself was still waiting for something else to go wrong. But there was also a hush, an almost sacred quiet, that wrapped itself around the little clearing where, against all odds, the foal had survived the night. Sierra's eyes were gritty from lack of sleep, but she felt a kind of purposeful energy. She moved slowly, careful not to alarm her wild company. Midnight stood tall and still, his coat glistening in the morning dew, his eyes tracking her every movement. The foal, less steady, nuzzled at the stallion's side, seeking comfort. Ember the coyote lingered at the tree line, occasionally glancing at Sierra, always alert, her presence both a warning and a reassurance. Sierra approached the horses with deliberate calm, keeping her body language open and non-threatening. She let the stallion see everything she did, never hiding her hands or making sudden moves. She spoke softly, more to herself than to the animals, her words just a gentle murmur in the cool morning. "It's okay. I'm just here to help." When she was close enough to be noticed, but not so close as to crowd them, she stopped, knelt, and waited. She remembered her rescue training, how patience mattered more than anything. A frightened animal couldn't be rushed. Trust, if it was ever given, had to be earned in careful increments. She watched as Midnight flared his nostrils, testing her scent in the wind, the white rim of his eye flashing in a warning that he was ready to defend. But he didn't move to charge, only stood his ground, ears flicking, assessing her intentions. The foal was shaking, its knees barely holding, but curiosity edged out fear for a moment. Sierra let her gaze drift, keeping her eyes soft, non-confrontational. Slowly she reached into her pack, withdrawing a small first aid kit and a collapsible water bowl. She set the items on the grass and backed away, giving Midnight time to inspect the objects and decide whether they posed a threat. To Sierra's surprise, the foal inched forward, its nose quivering, sniffing at the bowl. The stallion tensed but didn't intervene. Emboldened, Sierra crouched lower, voice a soothing hum, and watched as the foal nudged the bowl. It was empty, so Sierra gently poured in fresh water from her canteen. The foal hesitated, then drank, its thirst finally overpowering its wariness. The moment felt like a miracle. This small, trusting gesture in the aftermath of so much fear, Sierra resisted the urge to reach out, knowing it was too soon for physical contact. Instead, she carefully observed the foal's injuries. There were scratches along its flank, dried blood streaked with mud, and a gash above one knee. It limped slightly, but put weight on all four legs, a hopeful sign. Midnight lowered his head, lips brushing the foal's mane, as if encouraging it to accept the help being offered. Sierra took her time, narrating her movements, opening a sterile wipe and dabbing it onto a clean cloth. The foal shied at the scent, but did not bolt. Sierra moved only when the foal moved, inching closer, all the while glancing at Midnight, silently asking permission. The stallion watched, muscles bunching, but he allowed it. Finally, Sierra touched the foal, her hand feather-light on its muddy shoulder. The little horse jumped, eyes rolling, but didn't flee. Sierra whispered, "Easy, easy," cleaning the wound as quickly and gently as she could. The foal trembled but stood its ground, as if sensing that this pain was a kindness. Midnight's head loomed above them both, a silent sentinel promising protection if anything went wrong. When she was done, Sierra backed away, giving the pair space to process what had happened. She felt her own breath shake with relief. This was why she did the work. These rare, beautiful moments of connection across the gulf of fear. The clearing felt changed now, less haunted by the night before. Ember, still at the edge of the trees, barked sharply, then loped away on patrol. Her presence remained a strange comfort. The coyote neither friend nor foe, simply another survivor negotiating the rules of a world turned upside down. Sierra respected her distance, understanding that Ember's help was real but never to be expected. With the worst of the crisis past, Sierra took stock of her surroundings. She gathered branches for a small fire, the warmth chasing away the lingering chill. She sipped instant coffee from a battered tin mug, her eyes always drawn back to the horses. She watched as the foal drank again, then dozed in the sunlight, head tucked against Midnight's flank. The stallion grazed, never moving more than a few steps from the foal, always positioning himself between the youngster and the open forest. Sierra pulled out her camera, snapping photos from a respectful distance. She recorded short video clips, quietly narrating what she saw. Wild mustangs display remarkable trust. Stallion demonstrates both protectiveness and tolerance. Foal accepting water and basic medical care. This is the first step to survival after separation from the herd. Hours passed with a quiet rhythm. Birds began to call from the trees, and a soft breeze carried the scent of grass and pine. The world felt almost normal. The only hint of remaining tension was the way Midnight occasionally tossed his head or glanced at the trees, the memory of wolves never far away. As the sun rose higher, Sierra began to think ahead. The storm had changed the land. Old trails were blocked, streams ran high with runoff, and the safest way back to open country would be difficult. She needed to plan carefully. She checked her GPS and marked the herd's last known range. If the foal was to reunite with its mother, they would all need to move soon. Yet for now, Sierra allowed herself to enjoy the peace of the morning. She watched as the foal, braver now, took a few unsteady steps away from Midnight, investigating the grass and fallen leaves. Midnight let it wander, but only so far. Ember returned, circling the clearing, and this time Midnight didn't even flatten his ears. The coyote had earned her place, at least for now. Sierra smiled, feeling something like hope. The wild had its rules, fierce, sometimes brutal, but not without room for grace. She saw it in every careful glance, every cautious truce, every moment when fear was replaced by trust. In the heart of the Montana wilderness, beneath a sky just starting to forget the violence of the night before, horse, coyote, and human shared a small patch of sunlight, united by nothing more than the will to survive, and the quiet, patient hope that somehow, together, they might. The sun climbed slowly in the Montana sky, each ray peeling away the memory of the storm. The forest's scars remained, trees twisted and snapped, muddy ruts gouged into old game trails, and loose branches strewn like pickup sticks. Yet, for the first time since dusk had fallen the night before, there was the sense of a new beginning in the air. Birds sang with hesitant voices, and the light had a clarity only found after rain. Sierra stood at the edge of the clearing, backpack slung over one shoulder, scanning the terrain ahead. She'd mapped out several routes the night before, but the storm had rendered her careful notes nearly useless. The trail she'd planned to use, an old winding path that skirted the steepest drop-offs, was now blocked by a tangle of downed pines. Rivulets of water still trickled along the slope, carving new hazards with every step. Somewhere out there, Midnight's herd, and the foal's mother, waited on the open range, but the way back had become a maze of obstacles. Midnight seemed to sense the tension. He shifted his weight restlessly, head high, scanning for threats. The foal grazed near his legs, more confident now but still limping from the night's ordeal. Ember the coyote watched from a rock a short distance away, her golden eyes flicking from Sierra to the horses and back again, as if trying to decide whether to continue her unlikely role as guardian. Sierra moved deliberately, giving the animals space as she started up the slope, her boots sinking in patches of slick, black mud. She snapped small branches with her gloved hands, clearing the narrowest gaps between fallen trees, all the while humming softly to announce her presence. She knew wild horses were acutely aware of human scent and movement. In this moment, her job was to guide, not to lead, to mark a path that would be safe for horses and coyote alike, never interfering more than absolutely necessary. At the top of the rise, Sierra paused, looking back. Midnight was watching her, ears pricked forward, body angled protectively toward the foal. Sierra crouched and pointed at the narrow path she'd opened. "This way," she said quietly, knowing the words meant little, but the gesture mattered. She backed away, lowering her head, signaling that the choice was theirs. To her relief, Midnight moved first, testing the trail with deliberate steps. His hooves made hardly a sound on the damp earth. When he was sure of the footing, he let out a low nicker, and the foal, after a moment's hesitation, followed. The little horse's limp was more pronounced on uneven ground, but determination burned in its eyes. Ember loped along the edge of the group, every sense alert. The journey was slow, every yard hard-won. Sometimes Sierra would detour, clearing rocks or breaking off saplings to widen the path, all the while careful never to move directly toward the horses. She marked obstacles with strips of neon tape from her kit, hoping to help Midnight spot the safest routes if he needed to improvise. Each time she did, she paused and waited, giving the wild its due, never presuming that her way was the only way. An hour passed, then two. The sun was hot now, glinting off puddles and making the underbrush shimmer with life. At one point, a deer burst from the thicket, startling the group. The foal spooked, bolting into a bramble, but Midnight caught up and herded it gently back to the path. Sierra saw the stallion's patience, how he never punished the foal's fear, only guided it with gentle nudges and quiet confidence. Twice Ember darted ahead, sniffing the air and barking at something Sierra couldn't see. The coyote seemed to sense danger before anyone else, her posture shifting from casual to defensive in an instant. Once she doubled back, hackles raised, and growled into a shadowy copse. Sierra stopped, heart pounding, readying her bear spray. But after a tense minute, the danger passed. Perhaps only a passing fox or a lingering scent of wolf. By midday, the group reached a narrow ravine, its banks muddy and steep from the night's rain. Water gurgled through the rocks, deeper and swifter than usual. Sierra hesitated. She could cross easily enough, but the horses would need a shallower place and the foal's limp would make it treacherous. Ember trotted along the edge, testing rocks with her paws, until she found a place where the water spread out over a gravel bar, shallow and calm. Midnight approached the crossing, lowering his head to study the current. The foal balked, trembling, memories of last night's chaos rising like shadows. Sierra stayed back, resisting every urge to help, knowing that interference might only spook the animals. She whispered, barely audible, "You can do it, little one." With a snort, Midnight stepped into the water, testing the footing, then crossed slowly and carefully. The foal hesitated, hooves digging in, but Midnight paused on the far bank and let out a deep, encouraging nicker. Ember barked twice, circling behind the foal in a gentle, guiding arc, her body language more shepherd than predator. The foal, seeing its protectors on both sides, took a halting step, then another, water swirling around its knees. At last, it made the crossing, climbing onto the far bank with a flurry of splashes, sides heaving with relief. Sierra's heart soared. She crossed last, boots slippery but sure, and for a moment, all four survivors, human, stallion, foal, and coyote, stood together on the same patch of sunlit grass, united by a fragile bond. It wasn't friendship in the way people understood it, but something older, rawer, a mutual recognition that the wild could be navigated, but only if each played their part. As afternoon waned, the land began to open up. Patches of meadow appeared between the trees, and the breeze carried the scent of sage and distant water. Sierra checked her GPS, relief flooding her when she realized they were making progress toward the herd's traditional grazing grounds. Still, she kept her guard up. The world after a storm was never predictable, and predators were always hungry in the wake of chaos. Twice more, the group was forced to detour around impassable obstacles. Once, Sierra found a fresh wolf track in the mud, the claw marks sharp and new. She shivered, scanning the shadows, but Ember had already scented the danger and doubled her patrols, her barks growing sharper, her presence a warning to any lurking threat. By the time the sun dipped low, painting the sky with streaks of gold and purple, the little group had covered only a few miles, but it felt like a triumph. Midnight grazed beside the foal, standing sentinel as dusk crept in. Ember circled wider now, vanishing and reappearing with the shifting shadows. Sierra, exhausted but hopeful, set up her camp nearby. Never too close, always respecting the invisible line between her world and theirs. She wrote in her journal by headlamp, hands shaking from fatigue but heart steady with purpose. Progress is slow, but unity endures. Every obstacle cleared, every crossing made, is a testament to the resilience of wild hearts and the silent, stubborn hope that guides them. Night fell quietly, without the drama of the last, as the battered land embraced a new rhythm. The journey had begun, and ahead lay danger, but also the promise of home. The evening air felt heavy, thick with the smell of wet earth and pine needles. Sierra sat on a smooth stone near her small campfire, just far enough away from the horses not to intrude, but close enough to watch them through the thinning dusk. The flames flickered, casting jittery shadows on her notebook as she wrote down observations about the journey so far, the foal's bravery, Midnight's vigilance, Ember's tireless patrols along the trail's edge. For the first time since the storm, Sierra allowed herself to believe they might actually reach the open country, that maybe the worst was behind them. But the wild rarely lets its survivors rest so easily. Just as the sun's last rays faded behind the distant ridges, a sharp, almost electric unease crept over the clearing. Midnight lifted his head, ears pricked, body tense as a bowstring. The foal, which had finally begun to relax enough to nibble at tufts of grass, froze. Ember, too, was alert. Her tail straight, her golden eyes fixed on the dense tangle of willows just beyond the circle of firelight. Sierra followed their gaze, her instincts prickling. She knew that kind of silence, an unnatural hush that means something is watching, something that doesn't belong. She set down her notebook and reached for her bear spray, flicking off the safety with a slow, practiced motion. Then, from the darkness, a guttural growl shattered the quiet. Eyes, too many eyes, glinted at the edge of the trees, and Sierra's heart slammed against her ribs. The wolves had returned, and this time, they weren't just curious or opportunistic. They were hungry, desperate, their ranks swollen by stragglers from nearby packs, drawn by the lingering scent of fear and the promise of an easy meal. There was a sharp, high-pitched bark, Ember's warning, urgent and fierce. She darted forward, hackles raised, her body a streak of rust and shadow. She circled between the horses and the wolves, yipping, snarling, feinting left and right. The wolves fanned out, forming a crescent around the clearing. Their leader, an old, scarred gray, stepping into the open with teeth bared. Midnight's reaction was immediate. He placed himself squarely between the foal and the pack, hooves stamping, tail lashing, head held high. He let out a shrill whistle, the sound echoing through the trees. A challenge, a declaration that this small herd was not defenseless. The foal pressed itself against his flank, trembling but silent, knowing instinctively where safety lay. The wolves moved closer, slow and purposeful. The leader growled, hackles bristling, and snapped at Ember as she darted too near. For a moment, it looked as though the coyote might be cornered, but Ember twisted away, drawing two younger wolves in pursuit. She vanished into the underbrush, her sharp cries bouncing off the trunks, drawing attention, sowing confusion, buying time for Midnight and the foal. Sierra's hands shook as she considered her options. She knew a direct confrontation would be suicide. She was outnumbered and outmatched, but she could make herself big, loud, unpredictable, just enough to break the wolves' focus and tip the odds in the horse's favor. She grabbed her metal mug and banged it against a rock, the clang ringing out like a warning bell. She shouted, her voice echoing, "Hey, get out of here!" and hurled a stick into the shadows. The wolves hesitated, startled by the racket. The leader snarled, snapping at the closest rival, torn between the temptation of easy prey and the threat of the unknown. Midnight seized the moment, rearing up with a scream that seemed to shake the ground itself. He charged forward, hooves slashing, eyes wild with defiance. The foal, seeing its protector move, followed with a panicked burst of speed, limp and all, toward a break in the trees that Sierra had cleared earlier. The wolves, distracted by Ember's barking and Sierra's noise, surged after them. Ember dashed out of the brush, drawing two wolves away from the main group, risking herself to splinter the pack's momentum. Sierra ran parallel to the horses, yelling and waving her arms, her own fear burning into adrenaline. She could barely see Midnight and the foal through the chaos, just flashes of dark and gold, moving together as one. The wolves closed in, nipping at Midnight's heels, but the stallion spun, kicking out, catching one wolf in the ribs with a sickening thud. The wolf yelped and fell back, limping, as the others circled, wary now of the horse's strength. At the ravine, the same muddy crossing they'd conquered earlier, Sierra realized they'd reached a critical point. The water was even higher now, swollen by the runoff, the banks slippery with new mud. Midnight didn't hesitate. He plunged into the torrent, the foal right behind him, water splashing as they fought for footing. Sierra scrambled for her flare gun, loaded a cartridge, and fired into the air. The sudden blaze of red light and crack of sound shattered the night. The wolves, startled by the flare, faltered just long enough for the horses to scramble up the far bank. Ember, her coat muddy and bristling, appeared at Sierra's side, panting hard, eyes never leaving the wolves. The pack regrouped, wary now, but not yet defeated. Their hunger drove them, but the odds had shifted. Sierra shouted again, firing another flare. This time the wolves retreated a few yards, growling, their eyes shining in the unnatural light. Midnight and the foal disappeared into the trees, Ember following with one last warning bark. Sierra's heart pounded in her ears as she dashed after them, not stopping until she could no longer hear the wolves' footfalls. They regrouped in a small grove of aspens, the horses heaving for breath, Ember licking a scratch along her leg, but otherwise unharmed. Sierra fell to her knees, gasping, the flare gun still clenched in her fist. For a long moment, no one moved. The only sound was the ragged breathing of 4 battered survivors. Finally, Midnight lowered his head to the foal, checking for new wounds. The foal was scratched, but alive, wide-eyed but unbroken. Ember flopped onto her side, her tongue lolling, exhaustion finally catching up with her. Sierra wiped sweat and rain from her brow, her hands shaking as the adrenaline drained away. She glanced at Midnight, their eyes meeting across the clearing. No words passed between them, but the message was clear. The wild was merciless, but so was their will to survive. In the uneasy silence, Sierra began to laugh, a shaky, relieved sound that startled a nearby bird into flight. "We made it," she whispered, not caring who heard. "We actually made it." Night fell deep and cold, but this time it was not marked by terror. Instead, there was a wary, hard-earned peace. Midnight stood guard, the foal dozed at his feet, and Ember kept watch from her spot beneath the trees. Sierra curled up in her sleeping bag, every muscle aching, but her heart full of a wild, wordless hope. Tomorrow the journey would continue. But tonight they rested. Wounded, yes, but undefeated. And in the wild silence that followed, Sierra understood. Survival was not just a matter of teeth and claws, but of courage, sacrifice, and the thin, indestructible thread that bound them all together. The sky over Montana's high meadows was washed clean by dawn, a deep, endless blue edged by ribbons of mist and golden light. The night's chaos, wolves and fear and desperate sprints, had faded into exhaustion. Yet even as the little band rested beneath a stand of trembling aspens, the wild world beyond them did not sleep. With every sunrise, new dangers awoke. Sierra Blake emerged from her tent before first light, limbs sore, mind heavy. She checked the foal, who slept curled against Midnight's strong legs, and scanned the brush for Ember. The coyote was already up, trotting the perimeter, nose to the wind, every line of her body broadcasting vigilance. Sierra's nerves were frayed. After last night's ordeal, she was haunted by images of snapping jaws and gleaming yellow eyes. But when she checked the foal for new wounds, she found only shallow scrapes and a stubborn spark of spirit in its gaze. The group set out at sunrise, moving through dew-soaked grass with a wary but hopeful air. Sierra kept her distance, offering guidance with hand gestures and soft words, but always letting the wild lead. She checked her GPS frequently. The herd's range and the foal's mother couldn't be far. She dared to hope that today their struggle might end in reunion. The landscape shifted as they traveled. The forest gave way to open slopes studded with sage and wildflowers. Snow still lingered in shaded gullies, and the air was sharp with the scent of distant rain. Sierra led the way over a low ridge, eyes peeled for any sign of movement, her own heart in her throat, not from fear of predators, but from a new anxiety that felt out of place in the wild, the presence of humans. She'd seen the signs last summer, a rusted tin can in the undergrowth, a tangled length of rope snagged on a fence post. Horse wranglers, illegal traders who hunted the mustangs for profit, selling the wildest and strongest to buyers who valued spirit for all the wrong reasons. In all her years of field work, Sierra had never run into the wranglers directly. But she'd heard stories. They used lures, hidden corrals, even tranquilizer darts. Most mustangs escaped, but some, especially young, injured, or separated animals, disappeared without a trace. It was Ember who noticed it first. As they rounded a bend in the trail, the coyote stopped cold, tail rigid, nose twitching. She let out a low, urgent growl. Midnight caught the warning instantly, stepping in front of the foal, nostrils flared. Sierra crouched, scanning the grass ahead, and spotted it. A patch of disturbed earth, tire tracks fresh and deep, leading into a narrow draw. It was a trap. She felt it in her bones. Sierra motioned for the horses to stay back. She crept forward, heart pounding, keeping low to the ground. As she approached the draw, the telltale signs grew clearer. There, in the long grass, was a makeshift corral, heavy wooden panels, some metal fencing, and a few battered water buckets. Ropes and halters hung from a post, and the unmistakable stench of men, sweat, tobacco, gasoline hung in the air. Movement caught her eye. Two wranglers, faces shaded by old baseball caps, were crouched behind the fencing, eyes fixed on the open range as they readied a lasso and a tranquilizer gun. Their horses stood tethered nearby, restless and skittish. One man muttered, "Herd's gotta come through here. No way around it after that storm." A chill ran down Sierra's spine. Midnight, the foal, even Ember. They were walking straight into a snare set by men who viewed the wild not as something to respect, but to conquer and sell. For a second, Sierra considered calling the authorities, but there was no signal. She was truly alone with her wits. Adrenaline surged. She needed to disrupt the plan, fast. She rummaged in her pack for her emergency flare, heart pounding so loud she feared the wranglers would hear it. She crept around the draw, finding higher ground behind a thicket of lodgepole pines. She watched as midnight paused at the edge of the clearing, the foal close behind, Ember circling back and forth, uneasy. One wrangler raised his lasso, whispering, "Now!" But before the rope could fly, Sierra struck her magnesium flare on a rock, sending up a blinding flash of crimson light and a hiss of sparks. She hurled the flare into the corral, where it landed among the buckets with a metallic crash. The horses tethered nearby panicked, rearing and screaming, kicking up a storm of dust and snapping ropes. The wranglers cursed, one dropping his lasso, the other scrambling for the tranquilizer gun. The corral's structure shook as one of the panicked horses collided with it, sending the fencing askew. Midnight reared at the chaos, his scream of challenge echoing across the draw. The foal darted in a wild circle, but the stallion herded it back, his body a shield against whatever danger came next. Ember lunged into the open, barking furiously, her presence adding to the confusion. The wranglers, blinded by the smoke and disoriented by the noise, abandoned the trap. One tried to calm his horse, but it bolted, breaking through the brush and fleeing into the hills. The other cursed and scrambled away on foot, boots slipping in the mud. Sierra kept out of sight, her heart thundering with triumph and dread in equal measure. With the wranglers gone and the corral in disarray, Sierra signaled the group forward. Midnight burst from cover at full gallop, the foal pressed close to his flank. Ember zigzagged behind them, barking to scatter any lingering threat. They sprinted through the ruined trap, past the broken fencing, and up onto open grassland, the sky above them wide and wild. Sierra followed, lungs burning, boots flying over rough ground. She risked a glance back and saw the wranglers arguing in the clearing, powerless to stop the stampede they'd set in motion. The wild had won, for now. They ran until the hills dipped into a broad plain, the grass rippling like a green sea. Midnight slowed at last, sides heaving, eyes bright with fierce victory. The foal staggered to a halt, legs shaking but unbroken, while Ember flopped in the shade, tongue lolling, her duty as chaos maker complete. Sierra knelt, catching her breath, tears pricking her eyes as relief crashed over her. She looked at Midnight, who stood silhouetted against the wide sky, a black monument to freedom and wildness. She looked at the foal, alive and whole, and at Ember, survivor and ally, and felt her heart overflow. They had faced nature's wrath and man's cruelty, and prevailed. But even as the sun climbed and hope rekindled, Sierra knew the journey was not over. Ahead lay reunion, or heartbreak, or both. But for this moment, in the trembling hush after victory, wild and human alike stood together, unbroken and unbowed beneath the endless sky. The wind shifted as afternoon gave way to evening, carrying with it a scent of sun-warmed sage and distant water, a fragrance that spoke of home to every wild horse that had ever run the Montana range. After the chaos and adrenaline of their escape, the little band, Midnight, the Foal, Ember, and Sierra, moved across the open plain in silence. The horizon stretched out in all directions, broken only by distant stands of cottonwoods and the shimmering heat of late summer. For Sierra, the vastness was both exhilarating and daunting. Every step forward carried hope and risk, as the battered group was now exposed to the world. Yet in that openness, she sensed a promise. Here in the land beyond the storms, there could be safety. The tension in her shoulders eased a little with each mile, even as she stayed alert for new threats. The foal, though limping and thin, kept up a determined pace. It no longer flinched at every sound. The memory of the storm and the wolves was now softened by the comfort of the herd's scent on the wind. Midnight, ever the sentinel, led with steady authority, his mane rippling in the breeze, the wounds from the recent fight now scabbed but testament to his courage. Ember ranged wide, her sharp eyes scanning the edges of the grassland, barking once at a flock of startled grouse that exploded skyward, and then loping back to check on her unlikely companions. As they crested a low rise, Sierra paused, shading her eyes against the sunlight. There, far below, a patchwork of shadows moved across the green. Shapes she recognized instantly. A herd of wild horses, scattered loosely near a winding creek, heads down as they grazed. She lifted her binoculars, heart skipping, and scanned the herd. Adults, foals, mares, dozens, all safe, all whole. And in their midst, a dun mare with a distinctive blaze. The foal's mother, searching the horizon, ears pricked and restless. "Look at that," Sierra murmured, a lump forming in her throat. "You made it, little one. You really did." Midnight stopped at her side, his body tense, muscles quivering. He snorted, picking up the herd's scent, and called out, a deep, resonant nicker that echoed across the valley, The foal answered with a trembling whinny, half hope, half disbelief, its eyes wide and shining. Down in the valley, the herd reacted. Heads came up, tails flagged. The dun mare broke from the group, calling frantically, her stride long and powerful. Other horses circled nervously, uncertain whether this was threat or miracle. For a suspended moment, Sierra held her breath, afraid the reunion would shatter under the weight of fear and confusion. Midnight nudged the foal gently, urging it forward. The foal hesitated, then stumbled into a run, head high, mane streaming, its limp forgotten in the rush of longing. The dun mare met her offspring halfway, skidding to a halt, neck arched, nostrils flaring. Mother and foal touched noses, exchanging rapid snorts and breath, circling, pressing close as if afraid the world might tear them apart again. The foal collapsed against its mother's side, shivering not with fear now, but with relief and exhaustion. The rest of the herd watched, wariness giving way to recognition, then cautious welcome. Midnight approached, head lowered in respect, and was met by a chorus of nickers and snorts, acknowledgement from the other stallions, acceptance from the mares. Ember lingered at the edge of the scene, tail wagging, watching the drama unfold with curious detachment. She circled the group once, then sat on her haunches, chest heaving, ears perked but cautious. Sierra noticed that the other horses tolerated her presence now. Maybe they understood, in some ancient way, that wildness sometimes required unexpected alliances. Sierra felt her own eyes sting with tears. She lowered her camera, unwilling to interrupt this sacred moment with clicks or flashes. Instead, she sat on the grass, hugging her knees, and let herself feel the immensity of what they'd accomplished. Against every odd, through storm and hunger and man's cruelty, the foal had come home. Midnight had reclaimed his place among the wild. Even Ember, outsider, trickster, survivor, had found a sliver of belonging at the edge of the herd. The sun slid lower, painting the plain in liquid gold. The reunited family nuzzled and whickered, the foal's head resting against its mother's side, the herd closing ranks as if to shield them from further loss. Sierra watched as Midnight was greeted by the dominant mares, his wounds inspected and licked clean, his bravery honored with gentle nips and nudges. Yet even in the joy of reunion, the wild never fully relaxed. A distant coyote yipped on the far side of the creek, and the herd tensed, eyes scanning for new threats. But Ember remained, her posture relaxed, tail swishing lazily as she watched over the scene. There was no fear here now, only wary gratitude and the deep, silent understanding that survival, always, was a group effort. Sierra stayed back, respecting the invisible line that separated human from wild. She jotted a few notes, details about the herd's reaction, the foal's behavior, the way Ember and Midnight stood just apart from the others, at ease but never tame. She snapped a single photograph, the foal pressed to its mother, Midnight standing watch, Ember in the background, the sky blazing with the colors of approaching dusk. As the first stars began to prick the heavens, Sierra felt a profound peace settle over her. She packed away her gear, her body aching but her spirit full. She knew she would return to the world of people with stories no photograph could ever capture, of courage, of resilience, of bonds forged in the crucible of crisis. On the plain, the horses grazed in the falling dark, the foal's head rising and falling in the slow rhythm of safety at last. Midnight's silhouette was black against the rising moon, while Ember melted into the tall grass, eyes gleaming in the starlight, a guardian and a witness to the wild's quiet miracles. Sierra lingered for a while longer, then turned toward her distant camp, leaving the herd to its hard-won peace. Behind her, the plain rang with the soft music of wild horses, the whispers of grass, and the low, satisfied growl of a coyote at rest. The night sky spread wide and deep, full of infinite possibility and the promise that even after the darkest storm, home was still possible. Night settled gently over the Montana plains, cooling the air and brushing silver across the endless fields of grass. Sierra Blake remained where she was, perched on the gentle slope above the herd, her knees drawn to her chest and her notebook open across her lap. The sky stretched wide, thick with 1,000 unfamiliar stars. The only sounds were the wind in the grass, the soft nickering of the herd below, and the occasional yip from Ember as she trotted along the perimeter, a restless spirit now embraced by the dark. Sierra let the moment wash over her, resisting the urge to move or speak. It was rare to witness a wild reunion, to see raw, wordless love between mother and foal, the trust between the black stallion and his battered band, even the cautious acceptance of a coyote whose place in the story was never guaranteed. The adrenaline of escape and danger had faded. Now, in its place was something deeper, a sense of belonging to the land and to the great, unknowable story that unfolded here, night after night, whether a human watched or not. She opened her notebook and wrote slowly, careful not to miss the truths that had revealed themselves over the past days. In the wild, she scribbled, survival depends on more than instinct. It's courage, teamwork, the wisdom to know when to fight and when to trust. I've seen leadership, not just from the dominant stallion, but from a coyote who risked everything, from a foal who never gave up, from a herd that chose acceptance over suspicion. She wrote about Midnight, the black stallion who had fought off wolves, risked his own life for a foal, and found his way home with dignity and strength. She wrote about Ember, whose sharp cries and clever feints had scattered the wolf pack, and whose presence, once suspect, had become a comfort. Proof that alliances could be formed across the lines of species and history. She paused, watching the herd settle in for the night. The foal was pressed close to its mother, safe and finally at peace. Midnight stood on the edge of the group, head high, his body a dark shadow against the pale grass, his eyes ever watchful. Ember curled beneath a low sage bush, not quite with the horses, not quite alone. The boundaries had blurred, shaped by necessity and bravery, rewritten by the storm. Sierra reached for her camera, but after a moment, let it rest. Some memories were too sacred for film or pixels, meant to be stored not in digital files, but in the soul. She gazed up at the sky, tracing constellations she could only half name, and felt the weight of gratitude. Out here, she realized, she was not the observer, not truly. She was a participant, drawn into the web of the wild, changed by what she'd witnessed. She continued her journaling, knowing that these words would eventually become part of her research, shared online with other scientists, conservationists, and anyone who cared about the fate of wild horses. She wrote, "The best work we do in the wild is often invisible. Not rescue, but respect. Not interference, but understanding. The wild teaches us to help without taking over, to see strength in vulnerability, to honor the stories of others without making them our own." Sierra's mind wandered back to the frantic hours, the pounding storm, the wolves' hungry eyes, the terror on the foal's face, the thunder of Midnight's hooves. She thought of the wranglers, the cold calculation in their voices as they set their trap, and the chaos that followed when she and the wild animals together had turned the tables. She wondered if those men would ever understand what they'd tried to steal. A world where loyalty mattered more than profit, where survival was earned through risk and sacrifice. She closed her eyes, listening to the steady breathing of the herd, the faint stirring of wings as a night bird passed overhead. Here in the open, beneath the vast and watchful sky, her own boundaries felt porous. She understood what it meant to belong to a place, even briefly. She'd felt her own limits, the edge of what she could do as a scientist, as a helper, as a witness. She'd learned again that the wild wasn't a stage for her story, but a living, breathing world with stories older than her own. Sierra opened her phone, using her satellite link to post a few images and reflections to her blog. "Tonight," she typed, "I witnessed something rare and extraordinary. A family reunited, old enemies forging alliances, acts of courage and leadership that have nothing to do with dominance, and everything to do with loyalty and hope. In these mountains, I learned again that real strength lies not in control, but in respect for the unknown, the untamable, the wild." As her words reached out into the world, she felt the connection stretching across invisible miles. City dwellers, ranchers, children, scientists, dreamers, all of them, in some way, searching for proof that the wild still mattered, that stories like this could still unfold under a night sky. When she finished, Sierra set aside her notebook and let herself rest. She thought of her own family, the sacrifices made and the bonds forged through hardship. She thought of midnight and the foal, of Ember's unlikely place at the herd's edge, of the lesson that belonging was not always about blood or species, but about courage and the willingness to try. She whispered a promise to the darkness, her voice barely more than breath. "I will honor your story. I will remember what I saw here, and I will tell it, not as a tale of taming, but of survival and trust, and the power of the wild to teach us what matters." Midnight's silhouette stood watch as the wind ruffled his mane, the herd sleeping in a loose circle of safety and love. Ember's ears twitched in her sleep, still alert, even in dreams. The night pressed on, full of ancient wisdom and the hope that tomorrow would bring peace, and perhaps a little more understanding for all who called this wild land home. Sierra closed her eyes, the stars spinning overhead, the earth solid beneath her. She had come looking for data, for knowledge, for answers. What she found in the end was something deeper, a lesson in humility, a reminder that in the heart of the wild, every story is worth telling, and every life is worth saving. Under the infinite tapestry of the Montana night sky, a gentle quiet had settled across the open range. The stars glimmered like a promise above the land, shining down on the herd now reunited, the wounds of recent days already fading into stories that would linger in the memory of the wild. Sierra Blake sat on a low rise, knees drawn up, arms wrapped around herself against the cool air. The herd, once scattered by the storm, now grazed peacefully below her. The foal, at last home, nuzzled at its mother's flank, occasionally breaking into a playful trot before returning to her side. Midnight kept watch at the edge, his silhouette a silent guardian beneath the starlight. Ember, never quite a part of the herd but never fully apart, lingered at the periphery, nose to the wind, eyes reflecting the light of distant worlds. Sierra closed her eyes and breathed in the scents of earth and grass, the tang of wild sage, the musk of horses, and the lingering crispness of rain-washed air. Her time among the herd was almost over. Soon she would return to the world of people and noise, to conference calls and city lights. But something had shifted inside her, some thread of understanding, hard-won and impossible to forget. She thought about the journey they had shared, the chaos of the storm, the terror in the foal's eyes, Midnight's courage, Ember's unexpected alliance, the ever-present shadow of human cruelty, and the small moments of grace that had carried them all through. She remembered her own doubts, times when she questioned whether she should intervene more or less, when she wondered if her presence helped or only complicated the hard calculations of wild survival. Yet she realized now that real help had nothing to do with control or rescue. It was about bearing witness, offering a steady hand when asked, and honoring the boundaries between worlds. She scribbled final notes in her journal, not as a scientist, but as a storyteller, a witness to something larger than herself. Real family is forged in adversity, across bloodlines, across species, across all the lines we humans think matter most. Watching Midnight protect the foal, seeing Ember fight alongside them, I understood that loyalty and courage can be found in the most unlikely places. That's a lesson as old as the mountains, but easy to forget when we close ourselves off from the wild. Courage isn't just about fighting. It's about protecting, about standing up for those who can't stand for themselves, about knowing when to trust and when to let go. The wild showed me that strength is quiet and enduring, a series of small choices made again and again, even when the outcome is uncertain. I've learned to help without controlling, to respect what I don't fully understand, and to find hope in places where it's hardest to see. The wild asks us to be humble, to listen, to observe, to adapt. In return, it offers lessons that cannot be taught in any classroom or written in any book. Sierra looked out over the plain. The foal, strong again, nudged Midnight, and then galloped a few joyful circles before stopping to rest in the long grass. The herd drifted closer, their bodies pressed together for warmth as night deepened. Ember, always alert, slipped through the shadows and lay down at the herd's edge, her head on her paws, content in the fragile peace she had helped secure. As the moon rose, painting everything in silver, Sierra felt the ache of departure. She packed her gear slowly, not wanting to disturb the animals or the magic of the night. She left behind only faint footprints and a few strips of neon tape fluttering on bent saplings, markers of a path taken, of choices made in the service of something wild and precious. Before leaving, she paused on the ridge, letting her eyes fill with the sight of the foal safe beside its mother. Midnight standing sentinel, Ember half in and half out of the circle of trust. She knew she would tell their story, not as a tale of taming or human victory, but as a testimony to the power of resilience, the necessity of respect, and the possibility of healing after loss. She spoke softly, as if to the night itself. I promise I will honor the wild not by taming, but by telling your story. With a final look, Sierra turned away, her heart full and her mind clear. She followed the narrow trail back toward the world of men, the sounds of the wild, soft nickers, gentle wind, the distant call of an owl, echoing behind her. Above, the night sky stretched on, vast and unknowable, holding within it all the stories of the wild yet to be told. Days later, Sierra published her account, pairing images and words with reflections that resonated far beyond the scientific community. She wrote not only of animals and weather and danger, but of the subtle truths the wild had given her. Out here, under a sky older than memory, I learned that family can be chosen, that courage can be quiet, and that hope grows best in places where survival is never guaranteed. The wild is not here for us to conquer or save, but for us to witness, to respect, and to protect. Her story spread, first among conservationists, then among ranchers, teachers, and city children dreaming of open space. It inspired others to look at the world with softer eyes, to remember that even the fiercest storms can give way to dawn, and that every life, no matter how small or wild, is worthy of a chance to return home. And on the Montana plains, beneath the endless sky, the herd moved as one, foal and mother, stallion and outcast coyote, bound not by blood, but by the crucible of shared struggle and the unspoken promise that tomorrow, and all the tomorrows after, belonged to the wild. So if you ever find yourself beneath those same stars, listen closely. You might hear the soft thunder of hooves, the cry of a coyote, or the laughter of the wind. Remember this story, and let it remind you, the wild still has much to teach, if only we have the courage to listen. If you found meaning in this journey, don't forget to like and follow our channel for more stories of hope, courage, and the wild world we all share.